Hey there, all you ghouls and goblins. Radio 85.9 proudly presents Horror Zoid with your hosts, Stevie Scares and Natalie Nightmare. Today's episode is brought to you by The Cozy Coffin, now featuring deluxe satin lining interior. Order now and receive a free bag of O negative. Welcome back, everyone, to Horror Zoid. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Here we are, episode 3. I don't know when we're going to stop keeping track, but I'm pretty proud of the run we're on right now.
Same. Absolutely.
We are really enjoying this, really having fun. We've talked about our favorite movies. We talked about our favorite genre and slashers. But now we're going to talk about another favorite genre of ours that we haven't really delved into yet. Probably our second favorite genre of film, and that is vampires. Vampire murder. That's what we're talking about today.
We've been really excited all week to fucking record this episode because nothing, for me personally, I'm probably more passionate about than vampires. Pretty sure I was that annoying teenager that scared everybody because of my obsession with it.
You know, what's funny is we didn't put any vampire movies in our top 5, either one of us. We didn't even talk about them in our honorable mentions. And I think that's another reason why we wanted to start the podcast in our first few episodes about talking about breaking down some of our favorite genres. Because, you know, the top 5 films gives you kind of like a Cliff's Notes version of who we are. It's kind of like trying to oversimplify ourselves. When really, when we delve into these genres, I think it's going to give you a better idea of who we are as fans of the genre, as fans of just horror in general, just to see kind of what we like and break down why we like it. So today, vampire movies, very important to us, despite not appearing in our top 5. It's almost like they're in a category unto themselves.
They are. Honestly, we could probably sit here and do a whole nother hour-and-a-half episode, and instead of just our top 5 favorite horror movies for us, it would just be our top 5 vampire movies.
Absolutely. I don't see why we couldn't do a whole nother countdown on that.
I mean, you know, if someone wants it, if we get enough people that request it, we've had some pretty kick-ass interaction with people on TikTok about this, so we'll kind of get to that later, but we're really excited about it. So,
tremendously
back to it. If we want a top 5 vampire, let's go.
Right. And so today we're just going to kind of be delving into the genre as a whole, and we thought the best place to really start is the original vampire itself, Count Dracula. So Count Dracula, I mean, we've talked a lot about film, but let's talk about the origin of Dracula in general in the Bram Stoker novel, where Count Dracula first appears in fiction and in literature, and then Bram Stoker's novel then adapted into several upon several films featuring the titular character of Count Dracula.
Yeah.
Count Dracula has probably the first portrayal, of course, being Universal Pictures' 1931, the original Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi, directed by Todd Browning. One of the most influential movies in not just horror, but film in general.
Yeah.
Just film's origins and roots were there in that film.
Well, and it's, obviously a lot of movies followed suit with Dracula from Universal, but that image alone, even now, to this day, you walk into a Halloween store around Halloween and you see a Dracula mask. That imagery, everybody knows the Dracula imagery. It's one of the most iconic things in horror movie history.
Absolutely, and it all started with Bela Lugosi in that film. Bela Lugosi might probably be the actor most well known for playing Dracula, whether people know his name or not. That's the funny thing. It's like, but when you think of Dracula, when you think of vampires in general, I think the first image in people's head is Bela Lugosi's Count Dracula, the Universal Count Dracula.
Yeah. Widow's Peak.
Oh,
popped collar, cape.
Such
red
an iconic
lining.
look.
Yeah. The white, stark white face, like all of that is immediately, I think no matter what generation you are, because again, that image of that typical vampire Dracula is just on so many things.
Right. The only other Dracula, the only other Count I think of in general is Count Chocula. And that's a completely different look. But
peak.
yes, those are probably the 2 most well-known vampires. I mean, even to the point where we're seeing it parodied in like not to we'll get to this later, but like Hotel Transylvania.
Yeah.
It's like Adam Sandler's
Blah, blah, blah.
Dracula is hilarious, but it is very much in the same vein as Bela Lugosi. So Bela Lugosi starts probably the visual representation of Dracula.
Yeah.
But then Dracula was, we have so many different iterations throughout history. Before Dracula, though, I guess we should give an asterisk there, because in 1922, we got one of the most iconic vampire movies of all time. Before that, Nosferatu, which, of course, is an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula before they were able to have the rights.
And Nosferatu was one of those movies as a child that freaked me the fuck out. His long fingers, the silhouette, the shadows. I mean, it's one thing. It is a movie that as a young child, it leaves something to your imagination with it being silent. You almost start to hear the voice of what he would sound like as you're watching him. But those fingers and the silhouette of his shadow coming down those stairs terrifies me.
Those stark white eyes, the sharp nose.
Absolutely.
It's
brilliant
tremendous.
Movie.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. F.W. Murnau directed it. A lot of legends surrounding it. One of my favorite, again, not to get too far off topic here, we're talking about the origins of vampire movies, but if you love Nosferatu, I highly recommend 1999's Shadow of the Vampire. It's a film that is about the lore and the legends surrounding the making of Nosferatu. Willem Dafoe plays Max Schreck as if Max Schreck was an actual vampire.
Wow.
John Malkovich plays F.W. Murnau. It is one of the most crazy pieces of fiction, and I absolutely adore everything. I wish it was available, on home video, because I would snatch it up in a heartbeat.
Yeah, for sure. That's something I've not even seen.
Oh, it's a wild film, and maybe we'll find a clip of it, be able to post it, on social media later.
Absolutely. I'm gonna hunt and scour for that.
Yes. So yeah, we have Nosferatu, we have Dracula, we have so many different portrayals. We have two very different portrayals in the early going of vampire cinema, and then from there, several different iterations. I feel like it was one of those characters that just kind of caught fire after the Universal picture.
Right. There's going to be countless. I mean, there's the big names that you think of, with Christopher Lee being the next huge one for me. But there's going to be so many movies. There's B movies, there's huge movies, there's blockbusters that all have Dracula. It would almost be hard for us to get all in one episode. Just
absolutely.
The people who've portrayed Dracula.
Yeah, Christopher Lee, one of the most noteworthy, of course.
Yes.
Then you have a few different actors along the way that have played Dracula. One of the most recent being Luke Evans.
Yeah.
Very underrated portrayal of Dracula, in my opinion.
Dracula Untold is a movie that it does some really different things, obviously, from the typical Dracula story. But even the imagery, there's some really cool stuff in that movie that even if it's not the greatest Dracula movie, the parts where you see him like fly with the fucking swarms of bats, that's amazing. It's so kick-ass.
It's a breathtaking movie visually. I really wish it got more love, but it deserves some of the criticisms. But
right.
the reason I go to Luke Evans is because I kind of want to circle back and talk about perhaps our favorite portrayal of Count Dracula.
You hear my big sigh over here, huh?
Oh, I do.
Everyone knows.
All I have to say, if you want to be romantic to your partner, just literally look them in the eye and say, I have crossed oceans of time to find you. It will instantly make everybody in the room swoon, whether you want them to or not. So, of course, we're talking about 1992's Bram Stoker's Dracula, Gary Oldman performing the titular Dracula character, and, of course, directed by the legendary Francis Ford Coppola of Godfather fame.
Yeah.
There's a huge cast. In addition to Gary Oldman, in probably his greatest performance of his career, and that's saying something with it being Gary Oldman.
Sure, he's a chameleon, as we've said 1,000 times over, but that role is just probably one of my favorites. It just can't be beat for me.
It really can't. You factor in Winona Ryder playing the female lead.
And Keanu Reeves with his really bad British accent.
I don't know what you're talking about. Of course. And then you factor in one of my favorite performances, Tom Waits, as Renfield, just terrific. Like what made anybody think Tom Waits, Renfield, like that will forever be one of the best casting decisions in my opinion.
And then there's The Brides.
Oh, The Brides.
There's some freaky scenes in that movie.
Ah, yes.
I mean, but everything from the score to, you know, just your visuals, the castle, you know, the flashback scenes where you see Vlad with the red armor on, like the red
armor
of that movie
was so well done.
Beautiful. The aesthetics are phenomenal. You know, obviously you have amazing actors and Gary Oldman. You've got some weak actors and the support, but you know, kind of some surprise, like, you know, Carrie Ells is in that movie.
As Sir Anthony Hopkins plays the legendary Van Helsing.
Exactly. I mean, it's stacked.
It's a loaded movie. It is a beautiful movie. Cinematically, it's just gorgeous. Like the outfit that Gary Oldman wears when he's Dracula and he's in the streets and he's talking to Mina.
And he does the see me.
See me. Oh, yes, that scene. He is
that
just...
top hat.
He plays him so romantically, so dramatically, so theatrically. It is one of the greatest performances in cinema, let alone best portrayals of Dracula.
It's tragic, romantic, and beautiful. It's all fronts. And then you... kind of come forward and you get Gerard Butler in Dracula 2000.
Yeah, I was going to kind of gloss over that. But you really wouldn't let that one go. No. I'll be honest. I love Gerard Butler. I love Dracula 2000.
He was a better Phantom. He should have stayed there.
Well, you know, he was great as the Phantom. He was terrific as Leonidas. He just had this very awkward stop along the way where he played Dracula. And that movie, I say it's the most appropriate title, Dracula 2000, because it's literally what every vampire movie looked like in the late 90s and early 2000s. It had club scenes. It had that electronic music score to it. It had people in leather, people wearing sunglasses, people with tight shirts. It was just like, for some reason, that became the vampire aesthetic of that era, the late 90s, early 2000s. Don't know why. Don't know what kind of marketing led to that, but it was it really gave us an entire culture.
It did, and it was also another one of those movies that had the fun movie lineup on the front with the cast kind of shifting towards the center. We talked about that
last week in Slashers, the sexy cast on the front of the poster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, he is phenomenal, and I don't think that he necessarily makes the movie bad. There's a lot that just kind of made it cheesy. But again, as we've said before, it's just a horror movie that you can enjoy no matter what the percentage score it has.
Right. Yeah, terrific point. But so I think that like those are some of the most noteworthy Draculas we like. If you think we should have talked about anybody else, please let us know on all of our socials and feel free to email us horrorzoidpod@gmail.com. We're happy to hear your thoughts and see what you think about the best portrayals of Dracula. But we do want to talk about some of the other types of great vampires that there are out there in the world of film, because it's not just Dracula that's out there. That we've seen the vampire lore evolve from Bram Stoker's story of Bloodsuckers to really incorporating more of the traditional folklore, that kind of I say the New Englandy kind of folksy backgrounds of vampires, you know, where they would talk about the belief in vampires kind of stems from the fact that you would bury corpses and the skin would shrink around the skeleton, making it look like hair and nails had grown, making it think people were undead. Which, of course, back then, you know, we didn't have zombies, we had vampires. That's what people thought the undead were, but they were vampires. If you came back to life from the dead, you were a vampire. And some of these other types of movies have explored that. Some of them explored new origins, where for some reason their skin is glitter.
Oh,
I mean,
it's the skin of a killer.
It's there. I mean, like, it's low hanging fruit. We got to talk about it.
But I mean, you know, I was not the kind of girl that got into Twilight. I was the kind of girl who was into Lestat, right?
Yes.
So, but I can't deny growing up through it and knowing and seeing the phenomenon that happened around us with the Twilight movies, right? And
it is crazy to think about how much of a pop culture craze that was, because it's very rare that you live through a pop culture phenomenon, but you kind of have that awareness that it is a pop culture phenomenon, and that's what Twilight was. It was like kind of our first meta pop culture situation there.
Yeah, and I mean, we were in the midst of Harry Potter phenomenon as well, and a lot of different things going on, and even now, we've got a superhero movie every other month and a new show every 3 months almost, it feels like. But there was something about Twilight that is fascinating, and I love seeing the people that are my age who were teens when those books started coming out, and they react to it on TikTok and watch the movies, and they laugh at it and go, oh my God, this was bad, but I love it.
Yeah, it's become a punchline. And to some of us, it was always a punchline, especially those of us who, we love the horror origins of vampires.
Sure.
I think Twilight became kind of a punchline because we really appreciated it. And I think most of us understood. Of course, there was some bitterness in the horror community towards this mainstreamy vampire kind of thing, soap opera kind of thing.
Right, because we want vampire movies to go wild and crazy, but for all different reasons.
Right, we want John Carpenter's vampires.
We didn't want pretty...
we didn't want Twilight. We wanted John Carpenter, James Woods blowing shit up kind of vampire movies.
Yeah.
So Twilight became a punchline because although some of us could respect it in the sense that, hey, it's vampires. Can we really be upset that vampires are getting some love?
Right. If
yes,
some little
preachy.
tween girl wants to, say, have a Team Edward or a Team Jacob shirt on, like, cool. That's, I mean, who knows what they're going to read next and get into next.
Exactly.
And, even though Twilight in itself is a really cheesy, weird romance, and I just know if I was a vampire, wouldn't want to go back to high school. But, there are some elements that I've seen with the movies that, you do still have some violence and things. And it's just the fact that they're constantly pretty with constantly pretty eyes, and then they sparkle in the fucking sunlight. I want something like Marcus from Underworld that flies after you relentlessly in a beastly form and then rips heads off. Like, that's the shit that I want to see.
So we're kind of doing it casually here, but we're kind of touching upon some of the different types of vampires that there are. And while we're talking about the kind of violent kind of vampire movies, I think one thing that you and I agree on is one of our favorite violent vampire movies is 2007's 30 Days of Night.
Yes.
30 Days of Night is one of those rare vampire movies that comes along. It's like, it feels like that we didn't have any warning about it. And it feels like afterwards, a lot of people don't talk about it the way they did. It was just this.
Yeah,
it had
I feel
this
like
weird.
It's underrated a little as a vampire movie. But then there's so many people that talk about it and really like it. Because I remember seeing and I hate that I don't know because I'm not good with names. So get used to that. But I remember seeing the artwork on the comics for 30 Days a Night at the comic book store. And that alone, like, kind of hooked me in, and I always wanted to buy the comics. So whenever the movie was coming out, I was stoked about it. Like, they're freaky looking, and they're scary. They're really scary vampires.
They are. They're one of the most terrifying designs I've ever seen. Is that one vampire in the movie who's bald, and he has just this very unique, odd kind of prosthetic thing going on his face.
Yeah. Yeah.
Danny Houston playing the leader of the vampire cult is one of the best villain performances ever. Like, you and I joke about it, but one of my favorite scenes, one of the most impactful scenes in a horror movie is when he's standing there and this girl says something about, oh my God, or oh God. And he just literally pauses, looks down at her and says, no God. Like, that is one of the most chilling deliveries of a villainous line I've ever seen in any film.
Yeah.
And, Josh Hartnett, of course, we grew up with him. He's a protagonist to us. Like, he was the protagonist in every teen movie that we watched.
Yeah.
He was, H2O, The Faculty, and, of course, he becomes 30 Days a Night. We're like, yeah, of course, we're cheering for you again, Josh Hartnett.
Of course.
Terrific hero in the movie. Mm-hmm. And, this 30 Days of Night, highly underrated in the world of vampire films. I feel like it doesn't get talked about a lot.
No. And I think the next one that we talk about that I'm going to kind of push into is probably my favorite. And I'm just going to say I would classify it as leather-clad nightclub vampires. So, like,
I call them the Blade vampires.
You get Blade, you get Underworld, you get Queen of the Damned, let's be honest.
And so let's just settle in, folks. We're going to talk about Queen of the Damned in pretty intense fashion.
Yeah. But nothing was more amazing. And even in the newest season of What We Do in the Shadows, they talk about the scene in Blade with, I want a nightclub with the blood sprinklers. Like, that's what Nadja says.
Yes,
like,
the blood sprinklers. Who can
that
ever forget
scene
that?
is, if you were like, hey, Natalie, pick your top 3 favorite scenes in a vampire movie, that would easily be in my top 3. That scene is amazing. Like, people make parody videos of it. We've recently seen it on TikTok where it's like me in the vampire nightclub and these motherfuckers walk in and it's like, shit. Like, I love seeing that stuff. And Blade is just, they're fun movies with cheesy lines, especially when you throw Ryan Reynolds into the mix. And they're all just really fun, but they have that same feel, you know, like Underworld even does. There's all these pretty vampires, but it's violent, and you get cool action scenes and cool chase scenes.
Right. You had to have pretty people
wearing leather for some fucking reason, which is why Queen of the Damned, you know, he comes out on stage all the time. He's in these leather pants, you know. He comes in, he's got a little fishnet
did Stuart
shirts
Townsend
on.
wear any item that wasn't leather in that movie?
Or like a shirt that actually wasn't see-through. I don't honestly think so.
Transparent tops and leather pants.
But
like,
I'm not
Stuart
complaining because Stuart Townsend is a cardboard cutout of a wet dream.
Well, he filled it out.
Yeah,
we'll say it that way.
Honestly.
Yeah, Queen of the Damned, though, is just one of those rare movies that encapsulated everything that vampire movies were in the early 2000s, late 90s. I know we were talking about Dracula 2000, but Queen of the Damned, in my opinion, was a much bigger deal in the grand scheme of things. First off, it's part of the Lestat saga.
Yeah.
You know, it was made famous by Anne Rice. We see the first film in 94 with Interview with the Vampire, and then it just went through all these alterations and changes before we ended up with 2001's Queen of the Damned. And Stuart Townsend, we mentioned, playing Lestat, doing a terrific job. Just as you know, all due respect to Tom Cruise, for some reason Stuart Townsend, when I think Lestat, I think of Stuart Townsend, rock star, you know, lead singer of the band. It's like that is the image I have in my head when I think of Lestat.
And I agree on one end, but I also love that they represent their decades really well. Because
I think that is something important to note as well. That's a great point.
Because Tom Cruise also, you get that Lestat whenever he was reckless and didn't care, which is kind of, you know, Lestat's character, but kind of in a different way, where Stuart Townsend's Lestat is the I don't care, reckless, fuck around and find out kind of way. And they both have
he's the Iron Man of vampires, because it's like how Tony Stark comes out at the end of Iron Man and he goes, I am Iron Man. It's like that's what Lestat did in Queen of the Damned.
Come out wherever you are.
Yeah, and like I love the scene where the journalists are just like snarkily asking him questions like, "What do the other vampires think?" And he's just straight
Get
up,
back
he's
to
like,
my room and I'll help you find out later.
He's like, they're gonna fucking kill me for spilling these secrets. He's like, I'm not joking.
Exactly.
It was terrific in the sense that it was a great adaptation.
Yeah.
It was unique to say the least. And I think one of the things we have to note is the soundtrack by Jonathan Davis, who didn't have that album.
Yeah. And the artists that they had to come in to do the songs for the release, obviously all of us hated that we didn't get the Jonathan Davis tracks for so long.
Yeah.
But, you know, you have Chester Bennington, one of the greatest vocalists of all time. You have Jay Gordon. You bring in David from Disturbed. You've got all these amazing people that came in and actually did the songs for the album release. But just hearing Jonathan Davis's voice in that movie, you know, coming out, dubbing over Stuart Townsend, who sat there and learned it all and had to perform it all, basically. It just makes it the total package for a movie.
The soundtrack really rounds it out, because you have an aesthetic, you have the acting that fits the decade, and when I say that, I mean it's not great acting by any means. It is very stiff, very robotic. Like the leads in the movie clearly are not. There's not
some
the
weird
greatest
chemistry there, but you also get, you know, I really like Marius. I can't think of the guy's name.
Oh, I love Marius. Marius in that movie is a whole mood in and of itself. He's sassy.
Like the leather or the velvet jackets that he has on and stuff.
He is.
And then
so
of course
stylish. Aaliyah, who plays Akasha, this ancient vampire in Queen of the Damned, is just who has this strange, interesting fascinating, romantic, beautiful, gorgeous courtship with Stuart Townsend's Lestat character.
Yeah.
And I loved it because we get to see kind of Lestat in Interview with the Vampire. You know, if you see that movie first, Lestat comes off very alpha, but then we kind of see him take a back seat to Akasha, which is I love that kind of switch, that role reversal there, where we see Lestat kind of take a back seat to somebody.
Yeah. And
Stuart Townsend, again, kind of fits that.
He does, and their chemistry, I think, on screen was phenomenal, and it gave us Deftones, and their scene gave us one of the sexiest scenes in movie history to me.
Yeah.
But I just feel like their chemistry was really good compared to some of the other casting members, male or female, in the movie. But it's the movie is a whole vibe, like the whole rock star thing, and the billboards in the background of the movies, and you get a Jonathan Davis cameo trying to scalp tickets outside, and it's just everything about that movie's
like I said, it's
phenomenal.
kind of a time capsule of everything from that time period. And we kind of touched upon it, but I think we would love to kind of talk more about Interview with the Vampire. Tom Cruise plays Lestat, and Brad Pitt plays Louis de Lioncourt, who is his his closest confidant, and of course he sires Louis. And then we get Christian Slater playing the journalist who is conducting the interview with the vampire.
Yep.
The interview being conducted with Louis. And then, of course, Kirsten Dunst in one of her earliest performances.
Phenomenal performance.
Amazing. And who can forget one of my favorites, Antonio Banderas as Armand. And a Guillermo's favorite, too.
Yeah. We love you, Guillermo. You're our favorite, even if you're not a vampire.
But Interview with the Vampire, probably one of the more well-known vampire movies in cinema history. One of the most successful as far as how it grossed. It was almost, I wouldn't say it was quite to that level. It was almost the same level phenomenon as Twilight. It just didn't get any more movies for a long period of time because things were a little bit different back then.
Yeah, exactly.
For some reason, studios didn't buy the rights to whole series. They would just buy the rights to like individual things and let them lapse.
Well, and I think
it was just a whole messy situation.
There weren't just teens eating up, the young adult novels.
Right. It was geared more towards. It felt like it was geared more towards the housewives, of the early to mid '90s. Because
honestly,
that's who they loved. It's like those were the ones who would buy the grocery store magazines. Right. It was like right. Well, it was trying to bridge the gap between the weird goth kids and their parents, I feel like, because it really was kind of this unique blend of those mom types that they like with the Brad Pitts and the Tom Cruises, and then what the goth kids like with the vampire movies. So
exactly.
It was they tried, respect the effort.
Right, for sure. So let's go ahead and we had posted a video on our TikTok, which is Horrorzoid Pod. So follow us there. We love to interact with you guys. And we got a lot of
strange week on TikTok.
It was. But apparently you guys love vampires as much as we do, because we've gotten a lot of good interaction on our video. That was just kind of asking you guys about what some of your favorite vampire movies are, or what you'd like to hear us talk about. So we're going to shout out a few people, especially if they've mentioned something that we've not seen, because that's something, too, that interacting with you guys, obviously, we have full-time jobs. We can't watch movies all day. So there's going to be a lot of movies we've never seen. So first one that we've gotten a few times here on TikTok is Lost Boys.
Well, who doesn't love Lost Boys?
Right.
I know you and I have a deep fondness for it. I think we watch it multiple times every year. For some reason, it's just one of those movies that we put on. It's a comfort movie for us.
It is.
Yeah, no better term for it.
The soundtrack, the saxophone scene.
Yep. Yeah. The saxophone scene, Tim Capello. if you don't know what that is, like, you've got to Google it.
Yeah.
Just like
Lost Boys saxophone. That's it.
Right. If you are listening to this and you're like, I don't have time to watch the whole movie. Of course you don't. You're listening to our podcast.
Yeah.
But just pause it for a moment. Go to YouTube. Look up Lost Boys saxophone scene. Experience that glory, and then go home and watch the movie later after you're done listening to this.
Yeah.
But Lost Boys featured so many great '80s staples. You had. First off, you had the Coreys, Corey Haim, Corey Feldman.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people don't, listening to this may not know, but those two were two of the hottest deals.
Oh, yeah.
They were like Zach and Cody or Drake and Josh.
I was in love with them as a young girl.
Yeah, the Coreys were a big deal, and they did this fun, cheeky little horror movie directed by Joel Schumacher called The Lost Boys. And some other actors in it. Kiefer Sutherland plays he plays one of the main vampires of the movie. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of an ensemble thing they have going on there, but he definitely takes on the speaking role for the vampires, as you can see. Other than Alex Winter, the other vampires in the group don't talk much. Probably aren't weren't the best actors for the 80s.
Well, they're just the lackeys.
They're cute though.
They are cute. They're all cute.
And then you get Jason Patrick, who plays the brother of Corey Haim in the film, who is, spoiler alert, turned into a vampire.
Wow.
And
Gee.
Yeah, and it's kind of played like a horror movie meets comedy almost. There's a lot of comedy, but there is some genuine horror to it, especially when you see the vampires take on their true form.
Well, and it kind of it gives me something that I've recently found out thanks to Movie Talk, that I really love when a group of random people band together to do something in a movie, and that kind of has the vibes.
Oh my gosh, yes. You're like I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like that. It was a trope of the late '80s and early '90s,
right?
Where these
like
ragtag
Goonies.
these ragtag group of people get together to fight off a common enemy.
Yeah.
This one being the vampires.
Yeah, not just one or two people, but it's like this kid who finds strangers working in a comic book shop in Santa Carla's like, you got to read this comic. It's about vampires.
You mean the Frog Brothers?
Right, like they're the shit.
Who doesn't love the Frog Brothers?
So, thanks. We had, like I said, a lot of people mentioning Lost Boys. I'm glad to know that there's a lot of people that love it. So we've got Swolebeards and Kosara, Robert Mathis 211, who also mentioned Dracula Untold, was the only person that mentioned that. So I held my promise. I said that it may be mentioned, and we did.
Yeah, it was Dracula Untold. It was another attempt at Universal to try to reboot the MonsterVerse, and unfortunately, it didn't do well for good reason. It was not the most impressive vampire or Dracula movie I've ever seen, but Luke Evans, again, great performance by him. I respect the effort. It was just. It's like the real big thing that's been plaguing Universal lately is they're trying to be like Marvel, and you can see it in this movie.
Yeah.
And that's just not going to work. That's not why people are going into these movies.
Exactly. Another one that we had some shout outs looks like Kenneth Smith 065 and I'm sorry if I'm butchering this, Freddie Aparicio 19. John Carpenter's Vampires. Now, I hadn't seen this movie probably since I was 15 at a house party, and I don't even think I was paying much attention. Probably shouldn't have even been watching it at 15. But we actually just rewatched this one.
Literally right before we recorded this.
Yes, because you guys mentioning it, it's been, again, so long. You said you barely remembered.
I barely remembered any details. I just remember James Woods and his general James Woods and shittiness.
Exactly. So, soundtrack is phenomenal. Vibes
well, it's
are
John
phenomenal.
Carpenter.
Well, yeah, John Carpenter. You got a lot of cheesy action movie lines, but it's definitely fun. I like the vampires. I love the concept that you get with Valak. His whole backstory with the Catholic Church and a reverse exorcism.
Yeah, the first movie I've ever seen to feature a reverse exorcism.
And that's how we got the OG vampire.
Yeah, it was just
the fucking church, man.
it left my jaw dropped. Like I said, I remember I watched it years ago. I was probably early teens when I saw it, and I couldn't respect and appreciate what it brought to the table. But now watching it again, my gosh, it is just it's a terrific vampire movie, and I see why you guys recommended it, and I see the fondness that you have for it, because I don't remember it being as good as it was when we just finished it.
Now, I will say, compared to basically all of the other vampire movies we've mentioned, there is a lot of homophobia and sexism in that movie. Some dialogue didn't age well, and I don't think it's necessarily the movie itself. It's just there's some really shitty characters. Mr. Crow is an asshole.
Well, it's James Woods, but it's
Yeah,
also
it kinda
symptomatic
fits
of the times. And
Yeah.
no, and at first I can't say enough. Not defending it. Everything that was
Yeah.
done and said back in those days was wrong and needs to be
For sure.
corrected and fixed. I cannot stress that enough. But it was a sign of the times.
It was.
It
It
was
wasn't the
where-
only movie where we
right.
saw
No.
a very toxic masculine character who has no problem pushing a woman around and saying some kind of homophobic
James
things.
Woods and Daniel Baldwin's characters both in that movie were just. It was a toxic masculinity kind of movie.
Yeah.
Before we knew what toxic masculinity kind of was. Before Gillette taught us what toxic masculinity is.
Yeah.
So, but again, it's this time capsule of where the world was at the time. And but I give John Carpenter credit. It may not be the best script, but gosh, what he did visually with that movie, what he was able to bring to the table and just make you feel from that movie, and aesthetically, what he brought to that movie, it somehow felt old but new.
Yeah,
it somehow felt classic but inspired. It was truly something to behold. And if you understood if you don't like certain dialogue.
Yeah.
Or certain elements, but if you're one of those people who can get past it and you can bring yourself to watch it with all those things considered, I think you will be very impressed with what John Carpenter was able to accomplish with vampires.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen worse character writing, but it was pretty cringe. So moving on to another comment, I think this might be the last one I'm gonna shout out here, is Creep It Real Customs. Thanks for being a mutual. They put Twilight, ... All right, let me stop. And they said, I'm going to go Lost Boys and one of my all-time favorites. So thank you to anyone that said this. Fright Night.
Fright Night. Fright Night is a one-of-a-kind vampire movie, and it's one of those ones, strangely enough, I saw later in life. Natalie actually introduced me to it. It kind of flew under my radar. I always kind of thought it was a very cheesy kind of vampire movie, and it is. It really is. Like, people were not lying to me when they told me that. They just didn't tell me how good it was at being a cheesy vampire movie.
Yeah.
It has everything. It has, like, the very schlocky kind of B-movie feel to it, especially when you get into Roddy McDowell's Peter Vincent character and the show that he has, the public access show that he has. Which
obviously I think we might be a little inspired by ourselves with the visual I can't even say it. The visuals of his show within the movie, and then things that we grew up with. You've got Elvira. Obviously, we watched Joe Bob Briggs, which is, a horror host, just kind of a different vibe.
Well, and here in our neck of the woods, we had a famous one called Sammy Terry.
Sammy Terry.
Yeah, and I don't know if anybody else remembers him. If you are, if you remember that from your childhood, definitely shout us out, because it means we have a lot more in common than you think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But yeah, the horror host concept was great. And then, of course, you have Charlie, the main character of Fright Night, who who believes a vampire has moved next door to him. And everybody thinks he's crazy and kooky and stupid until you realize he actually does have a vampire living next door to him, played by Chris Sarandon.
Oh, Chris Sarandon. He was a treat.
Oh, he was. And Chris Sarandon as Jerry Dandridge is one of the most iconic vampires, in my opinion. I love everything about his performance. Everything.
I do too.
He is one of those guys that you look at and you're like, he's a handsome man. But it wasn't until Friday Night you're like, he's sexy.
Let me tell you something. The scene whenever Charlie comes downstairs and Jerry Dandridge is standing in the living room. He's got that coat and the scarf on. And he's just so smug about being in his house. Right. It's just, he just oozes it. And then there's the club scene.
Well, like the club scene, before you get to that, like the scene where he's spying on him and he sees him kind of like the courting, the courtship.
He's with the hot lady next door.
And it's like, and he just like the way he kind of looks at, even just looking at Charlie, you're like, why did Chris Sarandon just turn on 100% sex appeal for this movie? Like, is that the start of Sexy Vampires? Can we thank Chris Sarandon? And Tom Holland, director Tom Holland, for giving us Sexy Vampires?
Yes, I think we can say that, because
let's blame them.
Even though you get this you know, kind of the style that you get with Lost Boys and a couple of others at the time as well, where they were only like really scary vampires when they turn around and they have the prosthetics on and their nails are longer and their eyes are yellow. Like that was a whole vibe.
It was. There's Fright Night brought so many unique things to the table. And you talk about the prosthetics, but I think the design on Amy after she is transformed into a vampire is
big
the
ol'
one.
smile.
Oh yeah, that big the big jowls of teeth that they give her. I think her look, like Jerry is terrifying, but Amy's look is way scarier.
Okay, but can we talk about Evil Ed?
Evil Ed! Oh my gosh, we haven't even talked about Evil Ed. Like when we're so excited about this movie, like if you haven't seen it and you don't understand why we're excited, please go watch it. Fright Night is one of the most fun vampire movies you will ever watch, and also. Don't sleep on the remake. Do not sleep on the remake. I don't care what you guys say. It is a true remake, by the way. It is. And you get a really cool cameo in that movie. But the casting and the way they updated it, you know, to kind of change, instead of having this old-timey horror host, you have this magician, Chris Angel type, played by David Tennant, in leather jeans or leather pants that are way too tight and like so far from Doctor Who, it's not even funny.
And he's got this fake mustache and he performs these magic shows and it's all kind of occult inspired. I think that is the most brilliant way to update Peter Vincent's character.
Agreed. I think David Tennant brought something wonderful to that film. He brings this fun playfulness, but at the same time, this very serious acting ability to it.
100%.
In a film that features, you know, some pretty hot stars from the time. You know, and Anton Yelchin was in it.
Yeah.
Christopher Mintz-Plasse, Imogen Poots was in it. Like great young cast at the time.
Yeah.
Also featuring Toni Collette, horror icon at this point.
I am your mother.
That's another movie and another story for another time. But you know, that's what we think of when we think of Toni Collette.
Yeah.
But yes, Fright Night, very different kind of vampire movie, but terrific, enjoyable, fun,
very fun,
and it's a wonderful palate cleanser of vampire movies. If you're marathoning vampire movies and you're just like, we've seen a lot of blood, a lot of gore, a lot of serious vampire movies. Put on Fright Night. It's going to be the perfect way to...
It's still blood and gore, but like fun and different.
Fun, right? Yeah, it's like
it's fun blood,
like,
just girly things.
Blood fun, guys. Yeah, that's what Fright Night is.
Exactly. And yeah, it was really cool to see some of the people that mentioned Fright Night. I forgot there is another one. So Moxlon Ibus said, "I'll be the odd man out just to present a new title, Blood Red Skies." So I actually looked this one up because it's one I've not seen, and we'll definitely
I haven't seen either.
Exactly go on our watch list. Pretty new movie as well, it looks like. But the general idea that you get when you Google Blood Red Sky is basically a mom has to unleash a secret to protect her son during a plane hijacking. So clearly she's probably a vampire if it's being recommended as a vampire movie for us. But I hope that maybe we can revisit that one in a future episode because that is going to be a new movie for us and hopefully a few other people who
I'm sure it will be.
Need a vampire movie to watch.
Yeah, if it's flown under the radar for us, I'm sure it's flown under the radar for other people. Not that we watch every vampire movie,
right.
But you know, it's just one of those ones. It's not one of the ones you hear mentioned often. So thank you for bringing that one up. We love when people bring new movies to our attention. It's not often that we hear new suggestions. We like, you know, you hear us talking, like, sure, we've just scratched the surface on vampire movies, but we feel like we've seen a ton of them at this point.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can introduce us to new vampire movies, new movies in a genre we already love. One movie I want to mention that has been on my watch list forever, and I think other people need to check out too, just based on the description alone, is a movie called Bliss. It is on Shudder. It's a vampire movie that's very different. All I know from the plot, so I can't spoil anything because I haven't seen it either, but I need to. It is basically takes vampirism and translates it to it like drug addiction.
Oh, okay.
So it is a very new, interesting take on it. Respect the attempt to try to bring something new to the table. And again, it's been on my watch list forever. I need to sit down and watch it. And I think once I do, I'm going to finally... I think once I finally watch it, I'm going to enjoy the heck out of it because it's right up my alley. It's something familiar yet something new and uncharted, and I can't wait to discover it. So I think you should all go watch it too.
Yeah, and that what you just said, I think we'll kind of shoot through this really fast here, but something we had kind of talked about when we were discussing doing a vampire show was the different types of vampires. Of course you have your typical fang-bearing bloodsuckers. Obviously, in Twilight, they're very different.
Right.
They don't
touched
even have
upon
fangs.
some of those categories already.
We've touched on some, but I think the thing that's interesting, what you mentioned, is something that kind of made me think of Only Lovers Left Alive, where they have to worry about what blood they actually ingest because humans are disgusting creatures with
Which
disease,
I love that premise
basically.
alone is that you got to be careful because humans are disgusting, and
Right.
that's the truth.
Honestly,
that's the message we should all take.
We put a lot of nasty shit into our bodies. So the idea of these vampires having to try to find pure blood and go to blood donation bags and stuff like that is pretty fascinating to me.
It's one of the most beautifully and visually striking films. Jim Jarmusch is a very visual filmmaker. He's he is able to bring fashion and style into his films in a way that I think is unlike any other filmmaker. And this film is no different. A good amount of scenes in the film take place in Tangier. And I think the way he shows that city, the way he films it, makes it. No film has made me want to visit a location more than what that film did. It really made that city look so gorgeous.
Yeah.
From this standpoint that I don't think you would see otherwise.
No, not at all. And I think that's something, besides just the types of vampires that's cool with movies, is seeing all the different settings that you get.
Like you get in What We Do in the Shadows when we see New Zealand vampires.
Exactly.
And how they live.
Yeah.
Literally, because it is a
Mockumentary, which, I was foreign to the movie, and I was just, when the first season, I only had maybe half of it out on Hulu, and I was just looking for something new to watch, and I stumbled across the first season of What We Do in the Shadows and just thought it was the most hilarious shit I'd ever seen. And we just ate it up. I think we watched it, the first season, a dozen times before the second season came out. And
Easily.
in that show, you get so many different types of creatures, but you also get a psychic vampire and an emotional vampire.
Right. And we haven't seen psychic and emotional vampires represented a lot in media.
No.
They've been written about, they've been talked about, but very rarely do they get shown. I think it's harder to show that and harder to display that, but I think the way What We Do in the Shadows has presented Colin Robinson, one of my favorite characters in any television show in history, it really shows you. I think it's a great way to digest what an energy psychic vampire is capable of. Because trying to explain it to somebody, it's difficult until you explain it. It's like, that one annoying guy that you fucking hate at work? Yeah.
That wants to tell you about the boring tasks of what kind of trash bags he got. And,
right.
The types of brown that go with brown. Like, it's...
The types of brown that go with brown. Yes, that guy. We all know that guy.
He's the perfect representation. And then, you get Evie, the emotional vampire. And everyone has those. The pity party kind of people that just want to tell you everything that's wrong and can never see anything happy
And if you don't think you know an emotional vampire, go through your contacts, find a cousin. I guarantee you have a cousin that is the emotional vampire. That cousin is like, my car broke down. Really? This is the 5th time this has happened, in today. Can you stop?
Exactly.
Yes, that is the emotional vampire in your life.
Yes. And shifting again to just different types, one that we recently liked, even if part of the show has always been kind of sketchy, the American Horror Story
Red Tide.
You create vampires by taking a pill that makes your artistic abilities soar and succeed, but you have to eat people.
There's a catch.
So I get to be a great artist, and this podcast is going to be super successful, but all I have to do is eat some people.
I see the gears turning in your head. You're thinking about it. And, if Jim O'Heir is offering me a drug that's going to make me a creative genius, and again, all I've got to do is, maybe I Maybe
Maybe a
you
little
eat
chomp,
some people,
you
little
know.
chomp here or there, little little
It's a
nibble.
little nibble.
You know, yeah, absolutely. Especially again, if it's Jim O'Heir, like there's not a lot of things I won't do if Jim O'Heir asks me. He is he's a charismatic man, one of my favorite actors. He's one of those few actors I'll sit and watch anything he's in. So anytime he pops up on American Horror Story, I'm like, well, I guess I'm settled in for the season.
Exactly. He's pretty amazing.
You also get Evan Peters in drag.
I mean, Evan Peters
Can we
is
talk
phenomenal,
about that? It's like, I know that has nothing to do with fucking vampires, but I just like Evan Peters in drag.
He's a vampire
alone
in the show, so it's okay.
He is a vampire. But that's the selling point alone for me. If you would have just said, like, look, this is about vampires, I'm like, BFD, American Horror Story doing vampires. What's new? And it's like, no, wait. Evan Peters. Yeah, I'm listening. In drag. Fuck.
1,000%.
You have me. You've gripped me. Let's go. Sign me up. Where do I sit?
Oh my goodness. Well, we went off on a tangent there.
This is what you get, guys.
We stan Evan Peters in this house.
Yes, this isn't Evan Peters stanship. If you do not agree, you are welcome to leave. The door is right there. Knob's been polished. You can find it.
Okay. I'm going to just glaze over that and go to another similar type of psychic vampire that we get represented, even though I think a lot of people don't consider it this, but I do, and I think other people do, is in Dr. Sleep.
Yes, a terrific. Yeah, dude, I love that you bring that up because it's like when we were talking about this episode and kind of outlining things and talking about the different kinds of vampires. When you said Dr. Sleep, I was almost getting ready to look at you and be like, "What are you? What the hell do you mean?" And I thought about it. And honestly, it's probably one of the most hardest hitting scenes in the movie is where we really get to see their powers demonstrated as vampiric in nature as it really can be.
Right.
When they drain the energy of some of these people and leave them for dead, or go to transform them, it is just so jarring to witness. But Mike Flanagan, genius, of course.
Yeah.
Who else could do this but Mike Flanagan?
He'll have a whole episode here eventually.
We're going to devote whole episodes to certain people. Mike Flanagan, one of them. So don't be surprised when that comes down the pipeline.
Yeah.
But and Dr. Sleep, of course, the sequel to The Shining. So you have the Overlook Hotel, you have The Shining. Now all of a sudden you're adding energy vampires to the Shining universe.
Yeah.
A universe that I would have never thought could have been more expansive in the way Stephen King had written it. He goes and follows it up, almost 30 years later with Dr. Sleep, and you're just like, my goodness, how could you make this more intense than you already did? You just knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. It's a fascinating concept, and I think it's something I like because I like the idea of like energy draining type things. So that energy vampire, I think, is just really, really cool no matter what level it is, whether it's, literally like soul sucking in a way, or it's Colin Robinson telling you about his weekend plans.
Right. Well, and one thing that we talk about with Dr. Sleep being a Stephen King adaptation, it's not King's first take on vampires.
No.
With Jerusalem's Lot, Salem's Lot, and Kurt Barlow, and just how amazing that came out in the book. And of course, in the TV miniseries, directed by Tobe Hooper.
I think there's people who've never even seen the full series, but still know the scene with the little boy at the window.
Oh, the little boy in the window is someone I hear people bring up all the time whenever we talk about scary scenes in horror. But it's a fascinating film in and of itself. Dr. Sleep and the Energy Vampires, Salem's Lot is more traditional vampires, but both have Stephen King's flair and touch to them. And one thing I think Stephen King doesn't get enough credit for is how he makes these incredible villains. But he gives them a weakness, and yet that weakness doesn't seem like a flaw. It just seems like a natural evolution of their species. How we see kind of Rose the Hat have certain limitations in regards to, how she can overcome certain obstacles in Dr. Sleep, and how ultimately Danny Torrance is able to overcome her in the end. The book and the film have slightly different endings, but ultimately the message and the concept is the same. We see in Salem's Lot, those vampires, are truly just forces to be reckoned with, but at the same time, he does add like a layer of vulnerability that doesn't seem like misplaced. I love the way Stephen King writes.
That's a great way
vampires.
to put it. Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of people actually really liked Dr. Sleep more than The Shining. And I would almost say that's pretty true for me. I think a lot of that is because I love the way Flanagan films and portrays things. But there is a lot in Dr. Sleep that's just really beautiful as a standalone movie, even without ever seeing The Shining. Because I feel like you can watch that and you see the little flashbacks and you kind of get enough of his past to be like, okay, I can watch this.
I feel like the book is the same way too. Like I remember picking it up and thinking, oh, it's been forever since I've seen The Shining or since I've read The Shining. I'm very curious to see if I will be able to pick up on this or if I need to go reread it. No, the book picks up the same way. It's, you do get glimpses into Danny's past, but ultimately it's a new story and a new narrative to focus on. And again, you don't feel like you're jumping in the middle of anything.
Right. Last one I want to talk about is actually a personal favorite of mine. I did not see anyone mention the movie, even though it's directed towards young adult, and the movie really doesn't do it justice. And I know you know where I'm going with this.
Of course I do.
Darren Shan's Cirque du Freak, the vampire's assistant, is a really fun movie as itself, even if it takes a lot of liberties from the book. And I know you've never read the novels. I love them enough that I have a quote tattooed on my arm for it. But
and when I was looking for a Christmas gift a couple years ago, my first thought was I have to get you the entire series. So the Cirque du Freak series is now sitting on our shelf right now because it is Natalie's a huge Darren Shan fan. She's a Shan stan. And she has Demonata, she has Cirque du Freak, and kept telling me forever, you need to watch Vampire's Assistant.
Yeah, and it's just fun.
Oh, it's one of the most fun vampire movies I've had the pleasure of watching.
You like circus aesthetic and sideshow stuff, which is ultimately how it starts with them going to the sideshow.
Yeah, at first it's a movie about a sideshow.
But you've got these two younger boys that are probably like middle schoolers or something, go to the show, and one's super obsessed with vampires and somehow recognizes a vampire on stage from one of his books. But he doesn't get to be a vampire because Darren does. But one of the cool things that I really like about them that they've touched very briefly on in the movie is that they don't ever kill people. They just go in while they're sleeping and they take a little bit and then they leave. And that's just how they are. But if you want to be the evil...
It's very YA novel vampire. It's a very YA novel way to get around the whole vampirism.
But it also gives a antagonist by making the group that do kill people and drain people.
My favorite character, Mr. Desmond Tiny.
Tiny.
Destiny. Mind blown. Illuminati confirmed.
Okay, so like, not to spoil anything in the books, but he's like big bad boy. He like the vampires have nothing on him, but he is a brilliant asshole in the movie.
It's a terrific antagonist to go along with great protagonist. Vampire's Assistant kind of took me by surprise because I remember when it first came out, it came along 2009, if I remember right, when the film was released.
Yeah, about that.
So it came out around the time of the Twilight craze. And with a cast like Josh Hutcherson playing one of the main characters.
Who was just in like everything.
He was going on to play in the Hunger Games, and it was just one of those things that had that very teen feel to it, even though you have a great cast with John C. Reilly, Salma Hayek, wonderful adult actors, but at the same time, had a very teen feel to it.
Yeah.
And of course it does, because it is a young adult novel written by Darren Shan. But I remember I think it just came out around the wrong time. And I think it would have been a bigger hit had it not been competing with Twilight and had the stigma of Twilight. I think it had two things going against it that were both related to Twilight.
Well, and, some of the other things, too, is... and even Darren Shan himself has kind of mentioned it after seeing the movie, but the books they start pretty tame, but Darren Shan, even as a young adult horror novelist, he gets really gruesome and he gets really depressing and he gets very down
macabre.
in the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
So, Demonata is probably one of my favorite series. Clearly with the name, you've got a lot of demon stuff. And it's really weird and really creepy and a lot of gross Stranger Things season 4 subtitle kind of dialogue.
You've already won me over.
But Cirque du Freak is a pretty serious book, and I think that's one thing with the movie is I wish that they had taken it a little more serious instead of trying to make a fun little cutesy romance vampire movie, because they added in a character that's not in the books to try to make a romance out of it, and I think that ultimately kind of hurts it.
Yeah, there are elements that could have been better, and when you explain the differences between the novel and the film to me, it makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
Why it would kind of earn this negative reputation. I think it had a lot going for it, but unfortunately, it also had some cons that played against it, and created or really defeated the need for a sequel.
Yeah.
Even though it really felt like it could have been primed for a long legacy. It kind of
Percy Jacksoned itself.
It did.
Yeah.
Even
if it got a sequel, but a lot of people hated it too.
Right. Well, it's neither here nor there. Yeah. We could do a whole episode on that. This is a horror podcast, not fantasy. So, yeah. But yeah, with Cirque du Freak Vampire's Assistant, it felt like it was poised for more, but at the same time, it just came out around the wrong time. Had a few negatives going for it with some of the liberties they took with the plot, and it just.
But it's fun, and I would
shot itself in the foot, as you said.
Even if it's not too horror-y, the way we like it, it's still really fun, and I think it ultimately it can be one of those movies that me and you had as kids. We were kind of talking about this the other day, where there was stuff like The Little Vampire, and there was Bunnicula, and there was Vampire's Breath and Goosebumps, and all these different things that, as kids, really kicked us into gear for our love of vampires. So, some 10-year-old might watch Vampire's Assistant and absolutely go balls to the wall vampire crazed.
Yeah, I hope they do. I mean, there's no wrong way to, enjoy horror movies, and there's no wrong way to enjoy vampire movies. And I think one thing you'll notice about some of the movies that we mentioned is they're all really fun.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that vampires represent to us is they are a lot of fun. There's immortality. Mm-hmm. There's this reckless nature to them.
Yeah.
There's the
30 Days a Night's not so fun. It's
but
pretty,
even then,
cold.
It's like this adventure survival kind of thing. That's somebody's idea of fun.
Yeah, but it's exciting and it's fun to be a part of and watch, even if it's terrifying. But if you're like us, being scared is having fun.
Right. Why else do we like horror? But we want to be scared. That's fun to us. We want to get our heart racing.
Exactly.
We're adrenaline junkies. From our couches. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We 100%. Get the best of both worlds.
Right. Exactly. And, just to kind of start to wrap things up, just with the idea of from horror movies with our love with vampires and, we mentioned the kids shows and things, but we were really surrounded, all over the place with it. You mentioned Count Chocula earlier, and, that might just seem like a serial to some people, but to some of us, it's like, Count Chocula came out once a year, and it was the greatest fucking thing ever.
It was our gateway into horror. It's like, what's this guy on the cereal box as a vampire? What's
Who's
a vampire?
Blueberry? Who's Fruit Brew? I like these guys.
Well, and for me, one gateway was I loved comic books as a kid, and we've talked about some of the Blade comics and things like that. Love Blade. I wasn't really a huge Marvel movie, but they did vampires way better than DC ever could have.
Honestly.
So I love Blade, and I also love Morbius. Despite the film,
he's not talking about the film. We haven't even seen it yet.
But Michael Morbius in the comics as a Spider-Man villain, and then later an anti-hero. Mm-hmm. And so, one of my favorite portrayals of a vampire, one of my favorite ways they've written a vampire was when Morbius got his own standalone series. It was truly beautiful and truly poetic, and again, if you haven't read it, go check it out, because it's a terrific portrayal of vampires. It's darker, it's grittier, it is noir, so expect that going into it, and it's a lot better than the movie. I can assure you that. It's not Morbin time.
I think that's one thing that sucked. Besides seeing Jared Leto's face pop up for the trailer, we were really excited when we saw the trailer.
For sure.
But then it came out and we saw everyone's reviews, and we haven't watched it yet. And I know we're going to eventually watch it. We do. With
I'm going to win her over one of these days, guys.
But I think one of my recent favorites, though, that I can really say didn't disappoint, and just major Mike Flanagan spoiler here, if you guys haven't watched it already, you should, but Midnight Mass.
Yeah, we won't go into too many details because I think it gives too much away.
I want people
to... It does go into the vampire genre.
Yes.
So if you were hesitant, if you were on the fence about watching Midnight Mass, whether you weren't looking for something with a religious undertone to it, or you just, maybe you're not a fan of Bly Manor and Hill House, which how could you not be?
Right.
But say there was anything holding you back, let me tell you, it does go into the vampire lore and legend, creates its own kind of narrative there. And you will be pleasantly surprised with how it fits into the genre so well.
Phenomenal. And it kind of brings me a little full circle to John Carpenter's Vampires and that I loved the way that they blended the Catholic Church and the vampires together. And that's all I'm going to say. And if you haven't watched Midnight Mass, just go watch it.
Right. And we're not here to talk about anything controversial, but
no.
One of my favorite things with vampire movies is how they weave faith and religion into it, whether it's a positive or a negative light. I think it's just interesting to see the mythos there that they're able to establish and evolve, and each filmmaker is able to make it their own. And again, John Carpenter kind of did that with vampires. Mike Flanagan did it with Midnight Mass. Each filmmaker kind of has their own flair and flavor to it, and that's why I think the genre of vampire movies is going to live on and on, because there's no wrong way to do it. Yeah. Even Twilight, for all its faults, we're not going to sit here and say it's perfect by any means, but hey, it's somebody's interpretation of vampires. Yeah. And love it or hate it, it's got its fan base. We have our fan bases that we're a part of, our fandoms that we love, and whether you like Queen of the Damned sexy vampires or 30 Days of Night brute vampires, or if you only like Bela Lugosi's Dracula, no matter what, we're all in the same boat. We love them for different reasons, and filmmakers are able to do different things with them, and again, it brings fun to the table.
100%. I think that's a fantastic way to put it, because I feel like you can't ask anyone and ever hear them say, no, I don't like vampires. Yeah. And if they do, they're boring. I don't want to hang out with them. We don't need that kind of negativity. Yeah.
So we're going to go hang out with people who like vampire movies. So on that note, we will leave it with this.
Yes.
One thing about living in Santa Carla I never could stomach.
All the damn vampires.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every weekend. Follow us on TikTok @HorrorZoidPod, and send emails to horrorzoidpod@gmail.com with your thoughts, questions, and stories for us to read on a future episode. To all our Zoids out there, stay scary.